Bessie Smith, of course, the Empress of the Blues, singing of a disaster, of a flood. Sitting with me, hearing Bessie Smith on this recording, is James Baldwin, brilliant young American writer, but perhaps a more specific description of Mr. Baldwin, since he is one of the rare men in the world who seems to know who he is today. James Baldwin, brilliant young Negro American writer. And as you listen to this, Jim, to this record of Bessie Smith, what's your feeling?
It's very hard to describe that feeling. The first time I ever heard this record was in Europe, and under very different circumstances than I'd ever listened to Bessie in New York. And what struck me was the fact that she was singing, as you say, about a disaster, which had almost killed her, and she'd accepted it and was going beyond it. It's a fantastic kind of understatement in it. It's the way I want to write. You know, when she says, "My house fell down and I can't live there no more," it's a great sentence. It's a great achievement.
The way you want to write, you say.
Yeah.
I'm looking now at page 5 of your new book, and it's a remarkable one. Nobody Knows My Name. It's a series of essays, articles, opinions of James Baldwin, more notes of a native son, the subtitle. And on page 5, the reason I'd chosen the Bessie Smith record, because on page 5 you write of your being in Europe, you're in Switzerland.
Yes.
And you said you came armed with 2 Bessie Smith records and a typewriter. And I began to try to recreate the life that I had first known as a child, from which I'd spent so many years in flight. And it was Bessie Smith who, through her tone and her cadence, helped me dig back to the way I myself must have spoken when I was little. And I remember the things I had heard and seen and felt. I buried them deep. And here's the part, I had never listened to Bessie Smith in America. In the same way for years I never touched watermelon. But in Europe, I reconcile myself.
Yes, well, how can I put that? That winter in Switzerland, I was working on my first novel, which I thought I would never be able to finish. And I finally realized in Europe that one of the reasons that I couldn't finish this novel was because I was ashamed of where I'd come from and where I'd been, and ashamed of the life in the church, and ashamed of my father, ashamed of the blues, and ashamed of jazz, and of course ashamed of watermelon, because it was, all of these stereotypes that the country inflicts on Negroes, that we all eat watermelon, or we all do nothing but sing the blues and all that. Well, I was afraid of all that, and I ran from it.
It's been over 30 years that the American Psychiatric Association and the American Psychological Association normalized homosexuality. Okay. During these 30 years, there has not been one psychological model of development of the child that leads to homosexuality unless you traumatize the child. If the boy experiences, and the girl too, if the child experiences a particular kind of trauma, a traumatic rejection, that boy is likely to become homosexual. If you do not traumatize a child, he will be heterosexual. That's the reality of it. The child is capable of becoming a homosexual or a heterosexual, but it's our responsibility as parents and as educators to take these children and direct them toward their natural, biologically determined gender, which is heterosexuality.
Trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you. That's a good thing, by the way, because if trauma, in terms of what happened to me as a Jewish infant under the Nazis, if that was the trauma, I'll never be a person who wasn't a Jewish infant under the Nazis and during that period of genocide. If trauma is the fact that you were abused as a child, you will never be a person who wasn't abused as a child. Trauma can also be inflicted not by what happens to you, but what doesn't happen that should happen. So that when your needs aren't met, that can wound as well. Even though you weren't overtly hurt, you were still wounded by not having your essential human needs met. But if that was the trauma of what happened to you, guess what? It'll never unhappen. But if trauma is what happened inside you, the wound that you sustained, the meaning you made of it, the way you then came to believe certain things about yourself or the world or other people. And if trauma was that disconnection from the authentic self, well, guess what? Good news. That can be restored at any moment. So that's why talk about the new view of trauma. When we see it as that wound, as long as we see it that way, it's a wound that can be healed. If we see it as a bunch of things that happened, that'll never unhappen. But we don't have to, the biggest lesson for me, and one I continue to have to learn, is that we don't have to allow it to define our lives, how we see ourselves, how we see the world, how we relate to the world, other people, how we relate to possibility, how we relate to even spiritual transformation.
And when I say I was trying to dig back to the way I myself must have spoken when I was little, I realized that I had acquired so many affectations, I had told myself so many lies, that I really had buried myself beneath a whole fantastic image of myself which wasn't mine, but white people's image of me. And I realized that I had not always talked, obviously I hadn't always talked the way I had forced myself to learn how to talk. And I had to find out what I had been like in the beginning. In order, just technically then, to recreate Negro speech, I realized it was a cadence, it was a beat, much more than, it was not a question of dropping S's or N's or G's, but a question of the beat, really. And Bessie had the beat. And in that, this icy wilderness, as far removed from Harlem as anything you can imagine, with Bessie Smith and me, and white snow, and white mountains, and white faces, who really thought I'd been sent by the devil. It was very strange. They'd never seen a Negro before. And in this kind of isolation, it's very hard to describe, I managed to finish the book. And I played Bessie every day. And really, literally, this may sound strange. A lot of the book is in dialogue. And I corrected things according to what I was able to hear when Bessie sang, and when James P. Johnson plays. It's that tone and that sound, which is in me.
This is in a forthcoming novel.
This is in a forthcoming novel, yes, yes.
The point you made a moment ago, the point you were speaking of, the sense of shame. Did you sense this, the sense of shame of a heritage that is so rich in accepting the white man's stereotype of yourself?
I'm afraid it's one of the great dilemmas, one of the great psychological hazards of being an American Negro. And in fact, it's much more than that. I've seen a great many people go under. And every Negro in America is, one way or another, menaced by it.
These are called self-states. Self-state is a frame of mind, a state of mind. Lots of literature on Jung called it a complex. And if we pay attention to this, we'll know where we are. Let's talk about the assertion. The assertion is, I'm feeling good and strong and confident. I feel connected to my feelings. I feel connected to others. I'm able to express myself. I know who I am. I'm grounded. I'm feeling secure. Usually, religious experience is in that category. I'm feeling good about life. I'm feeling good about me. I have a sense about me. Many of our clients have trouble staying in that assertion. Some of them have trouble even identifying it. I saw a man, a Pakistani actually, a Muslim, for the first time Thursday before I came here. And he couldn't relate to the assertive state. We had to spend about 15 minutes trying to recall it, and we were able to recall it, and I'll tell you how we get them to recall it. What I'm saying here is that you cannot go from assertion to homosexuality. When you are in your assertive state, when you're feeling good and grounded and solid and secure, it may come to you as a thought, but there's nothing compelling about it. You have to go from, and look at the arrows, from assertion to shame to gray zone to homosexual enactment. Now, like I said last night, my wife says never speak in absolutes. I am speaking absolutely. This pattern always works. Those arrows only go in one direction, and that's how it goes. So, you say to your client, you cannot go from assertion to homosexual enactment. That's the good news. Therefore, the therapy is not to worry about homosexuality. All we have to do is keep you in your assertion. Now, what gets our clients out of assertion is shame. What is shame? Shame is when somebody says something to me or does something to me that makes me feel bad about myself. I'm talking, I'm engaging, and if anybody here is dealing with this issue, you can relate to it, and probably most people can relate to this. You're engaging, and they did something or said something, and you feel a disconnection.
and you feel like they're being critical of you. It's a shame moment. It's a shame moment. It's a moment in which I am suddenly deflated. I feel excluded. I feel left out. It could be done with one person. It could be done with a group of people. It's so 50% of our therapy is dealing with shame moments of the past regarding peers especially. I did this, and then the teacher said that, and I felt embarrassed. I was humiliated. I was ill at ease. Remember we talked last night about the anticipatory shame posture. The guy with a homosexual problem is always anticipating the next shame moment. There's a lot of literature on shame. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. It's the feeling of exclusion, expulsion. Suddenly everybody, and everyone can relate. Everyone has a memory of a shame moment. Everything was going great, and suddenly I said something or did something, and then it looked like everybody was against me, and everybody was laughing at me, and I'm not sure why. And the question of why is this happening now is very much a part of the shame moment. The shame moment throws the client into the gray zone, better known as dissociation. Notice how the early pattern with the mother set this all up. Because when the mother dissociated, the kid drops. There's an affect collapse. Okay? When they're in their assertion, they feel solid and strong in their chest. If we had some videos, if I had time to do this, I'd show you videos of when the guy moves into his assertion, he feels strong and solid in his chest and in his shoulders. This is what we call somatic markers of assertion. So we teach our client, when you want to go to your assertion, feel that solid feeling in your chest, in your shoulders, and they get that. Then we show them a pornographic picture. I say, hold that and look at the picture. And there's no reaction. There's no reaction. Because you can't feel that assertion in your body and have a homosexual arousal. That's what's going to drive the gays nuts, because this is a total contradiction to their philosophy. Okay. The gray zone is blah, disconnected, shut down, depressed, vaguely irritable, lonely, negative thinking. And then from there, the idea pops of acting out. That's the pattern. On the side is grief. Grief does not fit that, what we call the preceding scenario, the sequence of events that lead the person to homosexual enactment. That's ASGZHE. That's the preceding scenario. So a client comes in and he'll say typically, and every client in reparative therapy has to memorize that, and they have to know where they are on that. So a client who's just beginning therapy will say, I acted out on Friday night. No, I acted out on Saturday night. Okay, fine. If you acted out on Saturday night, can you follow the sequence? To go, I don't know. I can't. All I know is it suddenly occurred to me, I think I'm going to go act out. Acting out can mean anything, pornographic, whatever that means for the person. I said, well, let's do detective work. We call it detective work. When was the last time you were in your assertion? And they can't even remember when they were in the assertion. I go, well, let's see now. You acted out on Saturday night. How did you feel Saturday morning? Saturday morning, lousy. Yeah, I remember waking up. Okay, fine, you're in the gray zone. How did you feel Friday night? Friday night, what did I do Friday? They don't even remember, because they're in the gray zone. They don't remember, because they're out of it. Friday night, I stayed home. Okay, you're in the gray zone. What happened Friday morning? Friday morning. Oh yeah, I remember. Friday morning I felt pretty good. Good, all right. So you were in your assertion. Tell me about it. I woke up Friday morning. I was looking forward to having lunch with my friend. I was going to meet him for lunch, and everything was great. I did this, I did that around the house. I was looking forward to it. I met him. And how was the meeting? The lunch was nice. We were talking. And then you get the aha moment, because they're poking around, and I see it before they say it. They go, ah. They go, ah. The aha moment. Well, they say. It's very interesting, because sometimes they get the wrong moment. They go, well, I think it was this. But the affect is not there. They go, Then they get it. Okay, what was it? I was having lunch with Tony, straight guy. If he's Tony, he's got to be a straight guy, right? I mean, who are we kidding? If it was Stephen, that's another story. But anyway, it was Tony. And I was talking to Tony, and I was talking to him about something very important to me, and I was telling him, and he was very interesting, and suddenly his cell phone went off, and he started talking to someone. And I felt the drop. It's that simple. I feel, because they've been sensitized from childhood to malattunement means drop, collapse. And when we got off the phone, of course, he doesn't have enough ego strength to say, Tony, I think that was a little rude for you. I was right in the middle of a story. They can't do that yet. I mean, 2 more years of therapy and they can get to that point, right? Which, by the way, we call that double looping, and I'll explain that. And when the shame moment comes up, you confront the person and talk to them and repair instantly so you get back to your assertion. Oh, I see. So when I got on the phone, you felt like I was ignoring. Oh, I see that. And then the person recoups. And then they're back to their assertion. So we teach our clients, when you feel the drop, deal with it and recoup so that you're always in your assertion and you never have to worry about your homosexuality. And he said, come to think of it, he said, I was remembering, after I left Tony, I was walking back to my car, and I had the desire to look at some porn when I went back, but I did not, and I resisted it, and I was in a gray zone, until Saturday night I acted out. That is called a preceding scenario. The scenario, the sequence of events that set the client up to homosexual enactment. In the beginning, this is a big mystery to them, but they figure it out, and the trick is to identify the shame moment and deal with it. Now let me spend a minute on a close-up picture of the assertion-shame transition. Now we're getting into a little neurobiology. If this is getting confusing, I hope not. Try to follow me on this. We have left brain, right brain. The left brain is left for logic, linguistic, linearity, the thinking part. The right brain is the emotional side, all right? When you're talking to a person and there's an attunement, your right brain and their right brain is connected. There's a flow back and forth between right brain and right brain. That's the attunement. Now, when you're talking to some people and you're not clued in, you're hearing the words, but you're not getting that full attunement, and we know it. We all know when we're attuned or not, right? Like right now, nobody's attuned. I can see right away. No. So I just experienced a shame moment. No, but when you have that attunement, right brain, but if the person disconnects, then the right brain feels the drop, abandonment, collapse. I'm being ignored. I suddenly feel less worthy, okay? So that's called a double bind moment. The double bind, it's getting a little too technical, but I'm going to try it. Double bind means 2 binds happen at the same time. My left brain and right brain get disconnected. That's one bind. The other bind is with the other person. So a double bind moment, a shame moment, is when I am disconnected suddenly from the other, and I'm disconnected from my right brain and my left brain are not functioning. So when I'm connected, when I'm really attuned to myself, my right brain and left brain are in attunement. My thinking and my feeling is attuned. That's the assertive state, where my thinking and my feeling is attuned. A shame moment causes a split between my left brain and my right brain. That's why whenever you recall a shame moment, one of the characteristics, universal characteristics of a shame moment is, why is this happening to me? What's going on? Why are they doing this to me? What did I do to deserve this? This is all left brain trying to figure it out. There's a disconnect. So the right brain is feeling affect, but the left brain can't make sense of it. Okay, that is a shame moment. And then we'll talk a little later about how we do EMDR, stimulating left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain, on traumatic moments to recoup it. Talk about that later. Okay, so that's a double bind. A double loop is the person says, wait a minute, I'm just experiencing something going on here. This person just did that, and I'm feeling like this. I identify it and have the courage, which is a big issue for our clients, to say it. Hey, right now when you just did that, I felt blah, blah, blah. Now, if the person is receptive, they'll say, oh, you mean when I just did, okay, I'm sorry. It doesn't even have to apologize. All it has to do is acknowledge it. And then there's a reconnection. So now I'm reconnected to the person, and my left brain and right brain are going again. The circuitry is back to normal. Now, sometimes you have a friend who goes, well, what are you blaming me for? It's your problem. In other words, he refuses to double loop. So we teach our clients, those are people that are not good for you. Those are people who will shame you and not take responsibility. So part of the therapy is learning who to be friends with. You see, they become, and if you work with this population, you'll know what I'm talking about. They don't know who are healthy people to hang out with. They hang out with people that get dependent upon. People that use them, people that ignore them, they become dependent. They don't know what a healthy friendship looks like. And they don't know how to end unhealthy relationships. That's all part of the therapy. So that's what we teach our clients to do. Let me mention real briefly what grief is. If I had to draw a line in that diagram, the top four are about the present, and the grief is about the past. In the course of therapy, they have to deal with grieving of the past. Things that happened to them. The completion of reparative therapy is facing realistically what happened to you. The kind of parents I had, the kinds of experiences I went through, the difficulties I had in teenage years. I did not have a normal teenage like a lot of kids did. I didn't enjoy my life when I was growing up. I had this preoccupation, I had this problem, I had this inferiority, I had this, and they have to really deal with that. That's part of the healing process. We spend quite a bit of time talking about hurtful events in the past, which is grief. Okay.
One's born in a white country, in a white Protestant Puritan country, where one was once a slave, where all the standards and all the images that when you open your eyes in the world, everything you see, none of it applies to you. You go to white movies and like everybody else, you fall in love with Joan Crawford and you root for the good guys who are killing off the Indians. And it comes as a great psychological collision when you begin to realize that all of these things are really metaphors for your oppression and will lead into a kind of psychological warfare in which you may perish. I was born in a church, for example, and my father was a very rigid and righteous man. But of course we were in Harlem. We lived in a terrible house. And downstairs from us there were, all these, what my father called good time people. There was a prostitute and all of her paramours and all that jazz. I remember I loved this woman. She was very nice to us. But we weren't allowed to go to her house, and whenever we went there, we were beaten for it. And when I was older, that whole odor of gin, homemade gin really, and pig's feet and chitterlings and poverty and debasement, all this got terribly mixed up together in my mind with the whole holy roller white god business. And I really began to go a little out of my mind because I obviously wasn't white. It wasn't even a question so much of wanting to be white, but I didn't quite know anymore what being black meant. I couldn't accept what I'd been told, and all you've ever told in this country about being black is that it's a terrible, terrible thing to be. Now, in order to survive this, you have to really dig down into yourself and recreate yourself according to no image which yet exists in America. You have to impose, in fact, this may sound very strange, you have to decide who you are, and force the world to deal with you and not this idea of you.
You have to decide who you are, whether you are black or white.
Who you are. And then I must say, at this point, at that pressure, the question of being black or white is robbed of its power. I mean, you can still, of course, be beaten up on the South Side by anybody, I mean, the social menace does not lessen. But in some way, it is a world now which perhaps can destroy you physically. But the danger of your destroying yourself has not vanished, but is minimized.
The name of the book, if we may, this is directly connected. Nobody Knows My Name. For years, and I see a pic of you, known as James, never known as James Baldwin, like Home James, sometimes called George, in the old days Sam, or
Boy.
sometimes Boy.
Sometimes.
Nobody Knows My Name. Why did you choose that title?
Well, at the risk of sounding pontifical, it's at once, I suppose, a fairly bitter title, but it's also meant as a kind of warning to my country. When in the days when people, well, in the days when people call me boy, those days haven't passed, except that I didn't answer then, and I don't answer now. To be a Negro in this country is really just, as Ralph Ellison has said it very well, really never to be looked at. And what white people see when they look at you is not
Invisible.
you. You're invisible. What they do see when they look at you is what they've invested you with. And what they've invested you with is all the agony and the pain and the danger and the passion and the torment, you know, sin, death, and hell, of which everyone in this country is terrified. You represent a level of experience which Americans deny. And I think, this may sound mystical, but I think it's very easily proven. You know, it's proven in great relief in the South when you consider the extraordinary price, the absolutely prohibitive price the South has paid to keep the Negro in his place, and have not succeeded in doing that, but has succeeded in having what is almost certainly the most bewildered and demoralized white population in the Western world. And on another level, you can see in the life of the country, not only in the South, what a terrible price the country has paid for this effort to keep a distance between themselves and black people. It was in the same way, for example, that it is very difficult, it is hazardous, psychologically, personally hazardous for a Negro in this country really to hate white people because he is too involved with them, not only socially, but historically, and no matter who says what, you know, in fact, Negroes and whites in this country are related to each other. Half of the black families in the South are related to, you know, the judges and the lawyers and the white families of the South. They're cousins and kissing cousins at that, at least kissing cousins. Now, this is a terrible depth of involvement. It's easy for an African to hate the invader and drive him out of Africa. But it is very difficult for an American Negro to do this with, obviously cannot do this with white people. There's no place to drive them. This is the country which belongs equally to us both. And one's got to learn to live together here, or else there won't be any country.